I'm Emma Harper, and I'm 26 years old. The heavy oak doors of Whitmore and Associates just closed behind and honestly, it felt like watching justice walk them right out of my life. 30 minutes ago, they strutted in here like they owned the place. AITA claimed my $3 million inheritance and the mansion my Uncle Thomas left me. 8 years, that's how long it's been since AITA dumped me on his doorstep and vanished into thin air. Now they're back, calling themselves my legal guardians, like I'm still that scared 18-year-old girl they abandoned. My father actually had the nerve to announce they'd manage my money. My mother nodded along with this concerned expression. She must have practiced in the mirror, telling me I'm too young for this kind of wealth. I sat there quietly, hands folded, listening to them architect my entire financial. These are the same two people who chose drugs over their daughter. And no, they're lecturing me about responsibility. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. Uncle Thomas gave me 3 months before he died. The moment Delaware opened it, their face transformed from arrogant to abs. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location below and smash that subscribe button if you've ever been abandoned by the people while we're supposed to protect you. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. 8 years ago, when my parents decided their addiction mattered more than their only child, they didn't just leave me. They did something far worse, something they assumed nobody would ever. Uncle Thomas was my father's older brother, the one who actually made something of himself, while my dad jumped between pyramid schemes and rehabs. When my parents showed up that October evening, strung out and desperate, they begged him to take me in temporarily until they could get clean. Uncle Thomas opened his home with he enrolled me in private test school, taught me everything about running a business, treated me like that daughter he never had, but more importantly, he investigated exactly why they really gave me up. The house they'd been living in got foreclosed 3 months there. They brought me to his door. Their car was repossessed 2 weeks after. The money they claimed they needed time to earn back had actually been stolen from their previous employer, which led to felony charges they only avoided by fleeing across state lines. They hadn't placed me with Uncle Thomas because they loved me or cared about they used me as their escape plan, knowing Thomas would keep me safe while they ran from the law. I was their insurance policy, a way to guarantee their daughter would be taken care of while they disappeared to avoid prison. For 8 years, I wondered why they never called, never visited, never even sent a birthday card. Now I find they couldn't risk but Uncle Thomas found them anyway. Private investigators cost money, but when you're worth millions, that's not really an obstacle. He tracked their movements through Nevada, California, and Oregon. He documented their arrests, their time in county jails, their pattern of using fake names and stolen identities. More importantly, he discovered they never actually got the heroin addiction that destroyed their marriage, their home, and their relationship with me had only gotten worse over the years. They exported their habits through small-time fraud, theft, and manipulation. They weren't struggling parents trying to rebuild their lives. They were career criminals now. When Uncle Thomas got sick last year, he shared everything with me. The files were thick, packed with police reports, employment records, and photographers showing the hollowed shells my parents had become. He warned me they'd come forth money when he was gone. People like that always do, he said. They can small inheritance like vultures smelled death. He was absolutely right. The funeral happened on a Thursday. By Sunday, they were calling me. Martha's voice dripped with artificial sweetness as she expressed sympathy for me loss. Asked about the will, then suggested a family meeting to discuss me. I agreed mostly out of I wanted to see if 8 years had changed them at all, if there was any genuine parental concern, beneath their obvious greed. There wasn't. They spent the entire car ride from the airport outlining their plans for a trust fund with them, as trustees' regular allowances instead of lump sums, investment strategies to preserve the money for my future. It would have sounded reasonable if I hadn't known the truth about who their ILE were. Attorney Whitmore finished reading Uncle Thomas's letter and set it down carefully. His expression grave ash, looked at my parents, who seemed to physically shrink in their lip. This is quite comprehensive, he said slowly. I'm afraid there are legal matters we need to discuss before proceeding with anything regarding Miss Harper's inheritance. My dad found his voice first, asking what kind of legal, the kind involving outstanding warrants in 3 states, I said calmly, pulling out my phone, the kind involving fraud theft and identity theft charges spanning nearly a decade. My mother's face went completely white. You don't understand, Emma. We were sick, we made mistakes, but we've changed. Have you? I asked, because according to the private investigator Uncle Thomas hired, you were arrested in Portland just 6 months ago for running a credit card scam. The silence in that room was absolute. My father started to stand, but Whitmore raised his hand firmly. I think it's best if you remain seated, Mr. Harper. We have several more documents to review. This is insane, my mentor whispered. We're Harper. We have rights. Actually, Whitmore said, opening another folder. You forfeited parental rights when you abandoned your minor child 8 years ago. Thomas Harper was granted legal, which remained in effect until Miss Harper turned 21. But whenever signed papers, my father protested. You didn't need to. Abandonment for more than 6 months constituted. I watched their faces as their entire shum crumbled before their eyes. The money they'd traveled across the country to claim was never going to be theirs. The daughter they'd planned to manipulate was no longer the helpless teenager they'd left behind. But it wasn't finished yet. Uncle Thomas hadn't just protected my inheritance, he'd given me the tools to ensure my parents' school never hurt me again. The real surprise was still coming. The second envelope was smaller, but its contents will destroy any remaining hope they had. There's more, my father asked, his voice cracking. Whitmore nodded, sliding new documents across the. Your brother was quite meticulous in his preparations. The first document was a detailed financial analysis of their activities over the past 8 years, compiled by forensic accountants. They'd stolen more than just money from me dad's former employer. Credit cards appended in dead relatives' names, government benefits claimed, elderly victims conned out of retirement savings. The list was extensive and damning, but the second document was the real bombshell. A formal complaint filed with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit detailing their pattern of interstate fraud. Uncle Thomas had died before he could submit it, but he'd left crystal clear instructions. If my parents ever attempted to contact me regarding money or inheritance, Whitmore was to file that complaint immediately. This can't be legal, my mother said, her voice shaking. You can't just threaten us like this. It's not a threat, I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. It's consequences. For the first time in your lives, you're facing actual consequence for your actions. My father stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. We're leaving. Come on, Margaret. We didn't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, Whitmore said quietly, pressing a button on his desk phone. Security is stationed outside, and local police have been notified of your presence in Thessaly. I had to admire Uncle Thomas' planning even in death. He'd anticipated every possible reaction, every escape route my parents made. Sarah, my mother said, turning to me with tears streaming down her face, we know we made mistakes, but we're still your parents. Doesn't that count for something? For a moment, just a moment, I felt like the old Emma who'd spent years hoping they'd come back. Then, I remembered the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering what he'd done wrong. The school events, where Uncle Thomas sat alone because my real parents were too high or too scared to show up. Being a parent is about I said, it's about choosing your child over everything else. You chose drugs when I was 18. You chose your freedom for 8 years. Now you're choosing money again. I reached into my prescient, pulled out a third envelope, one Whitmore hadn't seen. Uncle Thomas had given this directly to me with instructions to open it only if this moment came. Inside were photographs, pictures of me at high school graduation with Uncle Thomas beaming beside me and 12 empty seats behind us, marked reserved for family. Pictures of me at college orientation with Uncle Thomas while other families took group photos. But the most devastating photo was from 2 years ago, a newspaper clipping showing me receiving an award for volunteer work at the local children's hospital. In the background, clearly visible, were my parents entering what was obviously a casino. They'd been in town, less than 5 miles away from me, and they hadn't bothered to make contact. Fair, I repeated, sliding photograph across the table. Is learning what abandonment feels like. Mimata stared at the picture, her face. We didn't know you were it. You didn't care enough to find out. I cut her off. But I'm curious about something. How exactly did you know Uncle Thomas had died? I never. The obituary only ran in local papers. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. We kept track. My father finally admitted. You kept track of Uncle Thomas's health, but not mine. You monitored his financial status, but never checked if I was alive or dead. You researched property records and investment portfolios, but never once tried to find out if I graduated high school. I stood up, smoothing down me black dress. That tells me everything you need to know about your priorities. Whitmore cleared his throat and handed my sealed letter with my name, in Uncle Thomas's familiar handwriting. He is scared to give this to you after your prince had seen the other documents. I opened it carefully, aware they were watching my every movement. My dear Rama, if you're reading this, then the people, who should have been your greatest protectors, have proven on gain that they care more about money than they care about you. I'm sorry, Yahud, to discover this truth, but I'm proud of how you've handled it. The inheritance is yours, free and clear. But more than that, the life you've built is yours. The education, the values, the strength you've developed over these 8 years, no one can talk those away from you. Your parents willingly make one final attempt to guilt you into giving them money. They may claim to be clean, to need help, to have a changed. They haven't. Remember, you didn't owe them anything, not money, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. They made their choices and now they have to live with them. Be happy, my dear girl. You deserve everything good this world has to offer. Love, Uncle Tom. There was a postscript about checking safety deposit box 847 at First National Bank with the key held by Whit. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. My parents were staring at me expectantly, probably hoping Uncle Thomas had incredulity reconciliation. What did he say? My mother asked softly. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd given birth to me, but had never actually been a mother. She looked older than her 52 years, worn down by addiction and poor choices. My father wasn't much better. For just a second, I considered lying, telling them Uncle Thomas had encouraged forgiveness. It would have been the kind thing to do, but kindness hadn't protected me 8 years ago, and it wouldn't protect me now. Hesed, you haven't changed, I replied, and he was right. I turned to Whitmore. I'd like to proceed with filing that Phoebe complaint now. The sound my mother made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob, but I was done being their victim. The safety deposit box contained the final piece of Uncle Thomas's elaborate plan, and it would change everything. Whitmore and I drove to First National Bank in Slits, leaving my parents at his office, with strict instructions not to leave the building. The bank manager, Mrs. Henderson, had known Uncle Thomas for 15 years and led us through Thivok with reverence. He visited this box just 3 weeks before he passed, she said quietly, adding several items and updating his instructions. Box 847 was longer than I'd expected. Inside, Uncle Thomas had organized everything with his characteristic precision. The first folder contained adoption papers I'd never seen before. Official document showing that Uncle Thomas had filed for legal adoption when I turned 19. My parents had been served notice, but had never responded because they were using fake names in Nevada at the time. Legally, Uncle Thomas hadn't just been my guardian. He'd been my father for the last 7 years of his life. The second folder contained documentation proving that my parents had attempted to take out life insurance policies on Uncle Thomas 3 different times over the past 5 years. Each application had been flagged by insurance companies as potentially fraudulent. They hadn't just planned to inherit from me, they'd planned to inherit from him. But the third folder was the nuclear option. Bank records showing that my parents had emptied my college fund when I was 17, stealing nearly $40,000 Uncle Thomas had been saving for my education. They used the money to buy drugs and fund a cross-country trip that ended with their arrest in California. Uncle Thomas had replaced the money without telling me, paying for my entire college education out of his own pocket while quietly documenting their theft. I need to make some phone calls, I told Whitmore, starting with Detective Morrison at the Financial Crimes Unit. The drive back felt different now. I wasn't just a young woman protecting an inheritance. My parents were still in the conference room when we returned, but had aged a decade in the 2 hours we'd been gone. I set the folders on the table without a word. The adoption papers went first, followed by the insurance fraud evidence, and finally the college fund theft documentation. Oh God, my mother whispered when she saw bank statements. Emma, we can't stop, I said sharply. Just stop. I'd spent 8 years making excuse for them, telling myself they were sick, that addiction was a disease. But love doesn't steal from your child's college fund. Love doesn't attempt insurance fraud against the person caring for your... The police are on their way, I said calmly. Detective Morrison is very interested in talking to you both. You called the cops on us? My father asked, his face pale. I called the cops on 2 people who've been committing fraud for years and recently attempted to steal from me. The fact that you happen to share my DNA is irrelevant. We stopped buying family 8 years ago. What we know is strangers with shared genetics and A very long list of crimes between